What is the first thing you think of when you hear the word Titanic?
If you're over 40, most likely you're thinking of the actual accident that occurred to the RMS Titanic, the gigantic ocean liner. You're thinking of the night of April 14th, 1912, when the RMS Titanic struck that fatal iceberg and sank, costing the lives of over 1,500 of her passengers.
If you're under 40, you're most likely thinking of the James Cameron blockbuster by the same name. You remember the forbidden love between Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet and the stunning special effects.
But the latter has never been the true legacy of the RMS Titanic and her doomed, fateful final voyage. One cold April night in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in 1912, hundreds of lives were lost, but a legacy was born. You see, that was the night that the motto of the sea, women and children first, was cemented into the hearts and minds of America and Europe.
As you may know, the movie Titanic has been re-released in 3D. But what we would like to focus on today is the real legacy of Titanic, not special effects. You see, we believe that heroism flowers in Titanic moments, but it's cultivated in the day-to-day practice of virtue. We call these virtues Titanic Heroism and 3G. Those 3 Gs are give what you have, give more than you take, and give it your all. Benjamin and I have been personally inspired by the stories of many of those on board the Titanic 100 years ago. And today we'd like to share some of those stories with you using the 3 resounding principles that they embodied.
The first 3G principle is give what you have. This principle means that we need to be ready to give whatever our gifts or abilities are, whether they be our time, our talent, or our treasure. The musicians on board the Titanic were a great example of the principle, give what you have. There were 2 bands on board the Titanic. One was a trio, and the other a quintet. The night of April 14th, 1912 was both the first and sadly the last time that these 2 bands played together. The musicians had their music. They hoped that the music they played would calm and soothe the frantic passengers being loaded into the lifeboats. They gave what they had, regardless of how small they thought the offering. The band played on, even past the order, every man for himself. Now, playing until the ship sank certainly wasn't a part of their original job description. Yet the band gave what they had, and in the end, their lives. Many survivor accounts say that the last song played was Nearer, My God, to Thee. None of the musicians survived.
The second 3G principle is give more than you take. When we live this principle, we're not worrying about fairness or having as much as others, but instead practicing self-sacrifice in relation to our gifts. Now, there were many examples of this lived out on board Titanic, but one of those examples was Reverend Thomas Byles. You see, Reverend Byles was a Roman Catholic priest who was traveling from his Essex home to officiate at his brother's wedding in New York. His brother had bought his White Star Line ticket, but in a last-minute switch, it was decided that Reverend Byles would leave on board Titanic. On the night of April 14th, 1912, Father Byles was on deck praying when the ship struck the fatal iceberg. He immediately rushed down to steerage passengers, who, although thrown from their berths because of the accident, weren't informed of the actual cause of the collision until much later. Father Byles probably was one of the first to bring news of the iceberg to third-class passengers. To calm an already chaotic situation, Father Byles prayed with the passengers, offered general absolution, and led many of them onto deck. When he heard the order, women and children first, he began to load as many women and children into the lifeboats as he could. Third-class passenger and survivor, Miss Ellen Mockler, said of Father Byles, "A sailor warned the priest of the danger and begged him to board a boat. Father Byles refused. The same seaman spoke to him again and seemed anxious to help him, but the priest refused again. Father Byles certainly could have been saved, But he would not leave until one was left, and the sailors' entreaties were not heeded. Miss Smuckler continues, as my boat left the ship, and it was the last one to leave, and we were slowly moving further and further away, I could hear distinctly the voice of the priest and the responses to his prayers, until finally they grew fainter and fainter, until all I could hear were the strains of Nearer, My God, to Thee, and the screams of the people left behind. Father Byles gave more than he took, and he ended up giving even his life for his flock. Now, so far we've covered 2 of the 3 G principles: give what you have and give more than you take. The final 3G principle, give it your all, deals not only with giving, but with the way we give, giving to the fullest of our abilities. Chief Senior Marconi Operator Jack Phillips was an excellent example of this principle on board Titanic. Celebrating his 25th birthday on the ship, Phillips had been telegraphing for over 5 years. Though he worked with a fellow partner, Harold Bride, on board Titanic, Phillips' job was both taxing and tedious. Many passengers wanted to send out fashionable Marconi telegrams while on board Titanic, resulting in the overworked equipment needing repair during the voyage. Thus, by the night of April 14, 1912, Jack Phillips was utterly exhausted. Iceberg warnings had been coming in all day, and he had needed to work extra hard to fill in the backup of passenger telegrams. His partner, Harold Bride, woke up 2 hours before his own planned start time to give Phillips a much-needed rest. Just at that point, however, Captain Smith came in, warned the men of the situation, and ordered them to begin sending out distress signals. That started 4 hours of grueling work for Phillips, who put aside his fatigue to focus on doing his part to save Titanic. He sent out distress signals to various ships, hoping that at some point someone near would respond. The only ship near enough to render aid was the Carpathia, and she immediately set out for the ship in distress. However, the Carpathia was 50 miles away. At about 2:10 a.m., Captain Smith gave the order, every man for himself. Even past that order, Phillips and Bride continued to send out distress signals until the Marconi room began to flood with water. These 2 men ran out and ended up on Collapsible B together, the upturned boat that floated in the water. Jack Phillips died on that lifeboat from fatigue and hypothermia. He gave his all by going beyond the call of duty to ensure that help was on its way.
On Titanic, the motto of the sea, women and children first, worked. Because the men at that time were conditioned to act in a protective manner, and because the women at that time were honored to be protected. But not all agreed with the concept of women and children first. In fact, Miss Lyda Stoke Adams, a suffragette of the time, commented on the Titanic disaster back in 1912, just a few months after the sinking. Miss Adams said, "Of course, it is hard to answer whether the women and children should have been given the preference in such a disaster, but I don't think they should have. I think the women should have demanded that the boats be filled with an equal number of men, or that the men should have been given an equal chance in saving themselves, though in brute strength they are stronger. Years from now, there will be similar accidents, and I venture to say that men and women will share the disaster alike." Here we all are, over 100 years later. And how has Miss Adams' prophecy played out? Well, indeed, men and women are sharing in disasters. In 2012, Costa Concordia, the Italian cruise liner, struck a reef off the coast of Italy and foundered, thrusting over 4,000 passengers into panic. Utter chaos reigned over that ship. The order women and children first was given but not obeyed, nor organized to be carried out. On Titanic, the men acted as a unified body to protect the women and children. But on the Costa Concordia, Each individual made their own decisions as to what was best for themselves and for those they loved most. So when we look at the stories of the Titanic and the Costa Concordia, we see that we as a society must embrace the legacy of the Titanic. You see, there will always be those who will act heroically on their own, but there will also always be those who will not. The question is, what are the masses inspired to do? Now, I'm sure we're all thankful that the Costa Concordia was just offshore, and that the tragedy wasn't worse than what was revealed to us through the news. But if we want to inspire Titanic heroism in this generation, we need to teach and encourage the 3G principles. Now, frankly, I understand that all these stories of heroism we've been hearing today can sometimes be a little overwhelming. In fact, just a quick show of hands, how many of you think that if the Titanic or an incident like it were to occur again today, and you were on that ship, how many of you could say that you would give up your seat in a lifeboat for someone that you'd never met before? Just a show of hands. How many of you think you can do it? It's not a question that many of us ask ourselves. And the reason is because we always think that I won't have to do that, right? The Titanic doesn't happen every day. I'm not going to have to give up my seat or die for someone else. But all these real-life heroes, all the stories that you're hearing, they too didn't know that they would be called upon to give up their lives. Father Thomas, Byles, Jack Phillips, they did not board the Titanic knowing that it was to sink. We heard earlier today about the story of Todd Beamer on United Airlines 93. He didn't know that when he boarded that plane that morning that it was to be hijacked and that he would be called upon to take the plane back over. But the fact is that when the time came, Todd Beamer did strive to take that plane back over. Father Byles did give up his seat in a lifeboat. So too, all of us must be prepared to stand up and do something heroic when our Titanic moment arrives.
The reason it's so important to Benjamin and I to look through history and find these heroes in our own lives is because it gives a concrete example of role models throughout history who have taken the opportunity to take those Titanic moments and become everyday Titanic heroes in their own lives. And that's the point of the 3G principles. They're not just some heroic stories of what men and women did in the past. They're a call to action for us, for today, and for the future.
So today, what we, in the end, hope is that you'll be inspired to live and to practice the 3G principles in your own lives. Give what you have, give more than you take, and give it your all. Thank you very much for coming.
Stay there?
Okay. I'm impressed by every speaker that's been up here, but these are 14 and 17 years old. And they've been doing this for 3 years already. So let's hear it again for how amazing they are. You're welcome.
The Hero Roundtables are the global events that ask the question, what is a hero? You've just seen one hero talk. To find more and join the conversation, visit our website or social media.